Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Welcome back to the Meaning of Catholic. I am joined today by my friend and brother, Mr. Kevin Symonds. Kevin, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Yourself?
Doing well. Okay. I am very happy today because we're talking about a very exciting, fun, dramatic, sensational topic. But Kevin is perfect at taking the sensational and bringing it into the erudition that it needs to actually get at the reality of the situation. So, of course, we're going to talk about Pope Saint Leo. Maybe one day, Pope Leo. I've been talking about Pope Saint Leo the First a lot. That's why I slipped that. But, Kevin, before we get into our topic, what's new with you? What's going on with you? Any projects?
Well, it just I just had a big trip to Boston and back for a couple of different reasons, and then went away on a job interview out in Texas, and was just wondering what's going to happen next. And in terms of projects, I'm hopefully nearing the end of that Bella Dodd book that I've been working on. Her recorded lectures, I call it the anthology. It is being presently considered for publication with a Catholic publishing house. We're just checking, legal things, copyrights, all that good stuff, and just making sure everything's getting, dot the I's, cross the T's is the expression.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that'll be exciting. Another great sensational topic brought to the erudition that it needs. And you are doing I should promote these again and again because they're just so awesome. And this is the Alphonsus. This is what Kevin's working at PCP Brooks, which is the complete ascetical works of St. Alphonsus, put back into print by PCP Books. And if you click the link below, all the Meaning of Catholic listeners can get a 10% discount. You can buy Kevin's book about Pope Leo and the St. Michael prayer. Here it is. And you can just use the coupon code MOC 2025, get 10% off. Click the link below. It also helps us, helps our apostolate, because we're partnering with one of my favorite publishers. And I'm not just saying this, like, I've always loved PCP Books. And the reason is because not only do they publish great books, but their typesetting is always beautiful. Because this is what I've loved about, old school books in the 19th century. They're always just beautiful typesetting, no weird fonts or anything. So anyways, I'm glad that you're working with PCP Books. They've got a great guy working with them. What I want to do go ahead, please.
I just have to say, since you mentioned the typesetting, yes, and people may never really know the agony that we've had to go through in order to try to get that typeset. Oh, I could tell you horror stories. But I'm very deeply indebted to my team with the proofreaders and a friend of mine that is an absolute computer whiz who has really helped to speed up the process of getting things all corrected, OCR and everything. So I don't know if he would want me to name him publicly, so I won't. But I'm very grateful to my team. I really am. We got some good people working there helping us out.
Yeah, thank God. I've been talking to Jim and Spear, the other guy, Jim Spear. There's Parrott and Spear, two guys I haven't talked to at PCP Books. Anyhow, I wanted to start this conversation. First of all, we have Pope Leo the 14th, and the interesting thing about him, besides all the other facts, was that he was elected on the second feast of St. Michael. There are two feasts of St. Michael traditionally in the pre-55. There is obviously Michaelmas, September 29. And then there's all these other feasts in the pre-55 Missal, which commemorate various miracles, miraculous things like the stigmata of St. Francis. And one of them is May 8th, the apparition of St. Michael. And I just found out about this really cool thing, Kevin, you probably already know about this, but the sword of St. Michael, which is all the apparitions of St. Michael, which form a line. I'll put it up on the screen in a minute. And so the apparition of St. Michael on May 8th would happen in Italy. That's just the particular feast day that was incorporated into the Roman office because it's nearby Rome, obviously. But Pope Leo was elected on May 8th. So he was elected on this traditional feast of St. Michael, which connects him again in another way to his predecessor, namesake, Pope Leo the 13th, who obviously wrote the St. Michael prayer, which we're going to talk about today. So Kevin, any comments about that funny God providential coincidence?
Well, I can't say that I have too many comments about it. I mean, I know that it's people have noticed it and they've been discussing it, and but I'm actually the only real comment I think I could say is that I am a little not upset. I'm keeping an eye on how people are interpreting things. I know shortly after Leo the 14th was elected, um, people were making reference to the vision and so oh, this is going to be the fulfillment of Leo's vision now, and I'm just kind of like, oh no, please just stop before you hurt yourself. um Although one of the videos that talked about it did some really good work with AI generation of images, and I have to admit they did a really good job
Yeah.
depicting some of the scenes.
You remember which one that was?
I do, as a matter of fact. I've just wrote yesterday to the YouTuber to ask for permission if I could use some of those videos in a video that I'm working on,
Okay.
because they were really, really good. I mean, they're not exact, but they're very close, and it just kind of added a little drama to the scene, and it was really good.
Cool. Okay.
But I think by far the best written description was in Val Bianco's book, Sons of Cain. Oh, gracious, that was like 12, 13 years ago, I think. He had several pages worth just of like detailing it out and in a narrative form. And I was like, wow, this is actually probably the best depiction of the legends, as it were, the telephone game stories, as it were. More on that a little bit later. But
okay.
Yeah, so I recommend people to take a look at it if they wanted a written dramatization of it.
Okay, sweet. I just wanted to show this because it's a side note, but it's so cool. Because this is St. Michael's sword on the map. These are all the apparitions of St. Michael, which form a sword because they're a straight line all the way to Israel, and that's just a beautiful act of God's providence. So you have the one in Italy was the May 8th one. So, and obviously, as I said from the beginning, Kevin is the one who delves into all these things. We don't want to speculate and go into things we don't even know. We don't have any evidence of this. Obviously, everything happens by God's providence. He permits or wills all things. So it's no accident in the sense that God is in control of the date and all those good things. Will that turn out to be something or will it not? God knows. What I want to do before we get more deep into your book is try to set the historical context. Because we want to ask the question, like, why would Pope Leo, why would anyone in 1878, Pope Leo gets elected, 1878, he dies in, 1904, I think, but it's
03.
that 03, thank you. So it's this time after 1870, and 1870 was an apocalyptic trauma of the city of Rome. And of course, because there was this thing called the Alta Vendita, which was actually the Carbonari trying to create a liberal pope that they thought they had with Pius IX, because he was liberal in the beginning. And then eventually they capture Rome. And this was a massive apocalyptic moment where it was a huge trauma. Rome has not been sacked in only, a few times in history. Yeah, go ahead.
And incidentally, likely the fulfillment of Our Lady's words at La Salette about Rome shall lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist.
Oh, well, you got to elaborate on that if you're going to say that. Go. Please.
Well, it's just that was part of the famous secret of Melanie with La Salette. She said that the Virgin Mary had said that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. Well, at the fall of the Papal States in 1870, which is connected to the St. Michael prayer history, that meant that Rome was now in the hands of these evil people that were trying to destroy the temporal power as well as the spiritual power of the church. So that it would fit the bill of what Our Lady, what was attributed to Our Lady at La Salette. And so I think it's also misconceptions that happen about what Our Lady said or didn't say at La Salette. But insofar as the predictions are concerned, that would definitely fit that bill. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating because La Salette is so interesting because it comes right at the potato famine in 1846, right when La Salette is saying that God's wrath is being poured out because of the desecration of the Sabbath and blasphemies. And so there is a famine, which is God's wrath, and then there's this prophecy of further decimation. The forces of the Antichrist are these Masonic forces. There's the Freemasons on the one hand, and the Carbonari, which are separate. They're two different sects, but there's even more sects than that. And the Ultima Vendita came from the Carbonari, and their whole goal was to overthrow the Pope's claim, which is a Christian claim that Jesus is the King of Kings, that the Papal States will be ruled by the Pope. They'll have a liberal constitution, but it's the forces of Antichrist because they're trying to dethrone Christ from the temporal order. That's their whole point. And so there are unfortunately 20th century traditionalists who are forwarding this concept of the Ultima Vendita, but they take it totally out of context. They take it totally out of its historical context, and they apply it to all sorts of things that we have no evidence for those things. Any comments on the Ultima Vendita with the trauma of 1870?
Oh, hold on one second. Somebody tried to call me, and
Okay.
it threw off my headphone settings here.
Well, the point is basically that the forces of Antichrist and the forces of Satan were on everybody's mind in this time period, from going back to Gregory the 16th, before Pius the Ninth gets elected, 1846. And he starts out as a liberal pope, as I said. He gives all sorts of these concessions to the Freemasons and to the liberals and whatnot. And then they murder one of his officials, and he flees Rome. They seize Rome. And then he comes back with a vengeance and becomes the Blessed Pius IX that we all know and love. The Pope of the Syllabus, the Pope of Vatican I, who's just fighting tooth and nail with all of these forces of Antichrist. But ultimately in 1870, Rome falls to the forces of Antichrist. And so everybody's thinking about this. So is this the end of the world? This is a huge traumatic moment that we need to understand to really seize upon what goes on with Leo and the St. Michael prayer. So, Kevin, you got your tech all set up. You have any further comments about Ultima Vendita and whatnot?
Well, we did a show. Excuse me. We did a show about 4 years ago over on Reason and Theology with Michael Lofton and River Run, where we got a little bit more in depth about that. I would defer to a lot of the discussion that we had on that with those matters, because it's been 4 years now, and so some of the details are not entirely too set on me, but or set in my mind as well as they were back then. But yes, there were Freemasonic forces, the Carbonari and others, who were Garibaldi was one of the main figureheads at the time. I forget his first name, but last name was Garibaldi, that were leading these anti-church, anti-ecclesiastical forces over in Rome at the time. And this is actually where we get into the history with the St. Michael prayer. Pius IX, Blessed Pius IX, was the reigning pope at the time. And in the late 1850s, he instituted a series of prayers that were to be said after low mass. But they were prayers taken from different masses. I think there were 4 of them, if I remember correctly. And they were to be prayed for the intention of the, how should I say? They were to be prayed for the intention of the settling of all of these issues and things of that sort. Unfortunately, history went the way that it did, and as a result, what ended up happening was the fall of the Papal States in 1870 to all of these anti-Catholic forces. And Pius IX felt really bad about the loss of the Papal States, and he wrote to the Visionary of Lourdes, St. Bernadette, and she wrote him back a letter which had been lost to history for many years, but it had been recovered around 2012 by the president of the Mariological Society of Ireland, Dr. William Thomas. And there's also I believe he wrote and published an article about it, so I would defer to what he said there. But he basically she was trying to comfort him in the midst of these terrible trials. He also sent her a crucifix, which still exists today, and there's actually a picture of her holding said crucifix. and it has the phenomenon of effluvia associated with it. That if you when it's unwrapped, there's this inexplicable fragrance that suddenly just fills the room. I experienced that myself over in Ireland in April of 2012.
Wow.
So I let my Catholic roots out. I got my scapular and I was touching it to the crucifix. I went totally all full blooded Catholic on that one. So then Pius IX dies in 1878, and Leo XIII is elected Pope, which was a strange election because he was, I think, the Camerlengo of the Roman Church at the time, and that was usually not something that was done. But he inherited this situation where he was now a prisoner of the Vatican out of protest of what had happened with the loss of the Papal States. And in 1884, Leo, who himself was a Latinist, decided to revise those prayers after Mass that Pius IX had instituted. So they were published, I think, in January of 1884, the new texts. And it went out, everybody was changing things, and then all of a sudden, things changed again in 1886. And this is where we got the prayer to St. Michael. Suddenly, the Holy Father, he gutted one of the prayers that he had added in 1884, and then put I think it was what they called the posterior prayer, which was the St. Michael one that we know today. St. Michael, the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil, etc., etc. And that was a bit odd because if you ever seen the movie Spaceballs?
Yes.
Who would have thought Spaceballs would get in on this?
Yes,
on
yeah.
this discussion, but here we
God's
are.
providence just permitting and willing all things. Go ahead.
Well, you remember ludicrous speed, right?
Of course, ludicrous speed.
Changing something that fast is ludicrous speed in the church, and that doesn't happen without a very, very serious reason.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was there was radio silence for several years, but the prayers had been instituted, and that's what people were doing. And how should I explain? There was like radio silence, but people that knew stuff, they would talk to one another, or they would talk to other people, and oral lore was getting passed over the course of the next several decades. And that oral lore started picking up in the 1930s. First, in the German-speaking world, there was an article that had appeared in a German pious magazine, and the story kind of got blipped out there a little bit, just because it just went poop, and that it was a result of the St. Michael prayer was a result of a vision that Pope Leo had. Then it got picked up in the book, and my German is not the best, but it got picked up in a book called Weiche Satan, and it was essentially a novelization of what was already published in that article, if I remember my facts correctly. But now it was a standalone book. Well, there was some discussions taking place between a priest in Iowa, Father Joseph, I can't remember his name. It's in my book. It's all there.
Yeah, right. I remember the Iowan priest. I don't remember his name though.
Yeah, it was in connection to the famous Iowa exorcism case, which I guess is now being made into a major motion picture from Hollywood. And Father Theophilus Riesinger was the exorcist. He was a Capuchin, and he's buried actually out in up in Appleton, Wisconsin area, I think, somewhere into there. So he's buried in the Diocese of Green Bay, I want to say. So they've got a lot of stuff going on up there at fabulous Fox Valley. Pardon me, I don't know what's going on in my throat lately, but these stories kind of get mixed and mashed because the German priest out in Iowa, he had spoken to the editor of this German publication over there in the 30s, and that's how the story eventually had started coming out, including somehow this story with Leo's vision. There was some contestation of it. There was an article that had appeared from an Italian living here in the United States that basically he wrote a book called Angels on Horseback, Father Alfred Bandini. And he was just like, people, come on, stop this nonsense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's this kerfuffle there in the 30s. Fast forward about 10 years. In 1946, there was a cardinal, the Cardinal Archbishop of Bologna, Cardinal Nasali. He wrote a pastoral letter for Lent that year. And in this letter, he outs the truth. He says, yeah, actually, in fact, Leo did have a vision. And I know this because it was his personal secretary who told me and a bunch of other people about it, and named the secretary, Monsignor Ronaldo Angeli. And then he proceeded to say that the line of the prayer, who prowl throughout the world, he said, has a historical significance. He said that, and that's where he went into the vision. He said Leo's vision was about demons coming upon the eternal city, aka Rome. But the Italian word that was used was adensavano, which is a cooking term, and it means thickening. So imagine you're at the middle of the Piazza San Pietro there in Rome, and all of a sudden you see these figures coming over above you, and they're gathering and gathering, and what's going to happen is everything starts blacking out. Like light is getting occluded, and it's like they're thickening, they're congregating upon Rome. Specifically, in this case, I would say the Vatican. I think is more or less the general understanding of that. I do apologize if there's noises going on. There's the truck is going on by outside taking care of our it's trash day here. So if you're hearing something in the background, that's why.
No problem. Let me just read that part in your book. So this is page 27. So Cardinal Nasali is the first one who really gives us a first or second hand credible witness to this, because before it was kind of just a lot of hearsay. So this is quoting from Cardinal Nasali in his pastoral letter of God, Man, and the Devil from 1946. He says this, quote, and that part of the prayer, who prowl on the world, has a historical explanation, which has been shared numerous times by the Holy Father's most faithful secretary, who was very close to him throughout most of his pontificate, Monsignor Rinaldi Angeli. Pope Leo XIII truly had a vision of demonic spirits who were gathering on the eternal city, Rome. From that experience, which he shared with the prelate and certainly with others in confidentiality, comes the prayer which he wanted the whole church to recite. This was the prayer which he recited. We heard this many times in the Vatican Basilica, with a strong, powerful voice, which resonated in an unforgettable way in the universal silence beneath the vaults of the most important temple of Christianity, end quote. So, okay.
Yeah, just in case people want to see it, I just had to put this up here just so people can see it for themselves. This is straight page, image taken out of my book.
If you zoom in quite a bit, we can see the text. And then Nasali mentions the other St. Michael prayer. I know somebody was asking which St. Michael prayer is the original prayer. So there's just two St. Michael prayers, right? There's the one that we all know by heart, and then there's the Exorcismus in Satanam et Angelos Apostaticos. So the exorcism against Satan and the apostate angels. So there's just two St. Michael prayers, right?
Oh no, there's there are more.
There are more by Pope Leo.
Yes, and or his influence. Yes.
Okay, so tell us about
the 1886 one, the one that everybody knows.
The St. Michael prayer. We all know that one. Yeah.
Yep. Then there was another one in 1888, September, I think, that made it into the Raccolta. Then there was another one that made it at the 1890 Exorcismus prayer that you referenced earlier. That was published in May of 1890, I think, in the Acta Sancte Sedis. Then that was edited beginning in the late 1890s with Cardinal Gotti and Leo XIII, but it was officially published, I think, in 1902 by Friedrich Pustet and the Rituali Romanums. So they were the four versions of four prayers that kind of got out there. And then a little known one was there was a rite of blessing of Epiphany water that was heavily influenced by those later St. Michael prayers that made it into the Rituale. I think that's in my book. I don't talk about it terribly much, but it does kind of back up and affirm the blessing of, which is a unique feature of some of these prayers, is they were not exorcisms of persons, they were exorcisms of places, which seems to fit with what Nasali said about the vision that Leo had. He saw demons not possessing people. Nasali said Leo saw visions coming upon a certain location. So you could see the organic connection here between Nasali and Leo's actions.
So this all fits in with the historical context that we tried to emphasize in the very beginning, that these are the forces of Antichrist who took over the city of Rome, but not only the city of Rome, though, I mean, the entire Papal States. People don't realize it was a massive country ruled by the Pope as the monarch that he owned for more than 1,000 years. And this was all conquered by the forces of Antichrist, all these Masonic forces. And so we see the demons. So Pope Leo is seeing the demonic forces, because all these forces are just puppets of the fallen angels. And the fallen angels are closing on Rome by means of these forces. And then by the time... Go ahead.
And it was there was also something else that came to my attention at the time, was there was an exorcist in the late 1800s, I believe it was, and from Germany, who had some very interesting statements by demons, which of course we always have to be very careful of, because we're talking about the devil and the father, who was named by our Lord as the father of lies. But I put this in the book because it talked about, not so much so that people could pay attention to what was attributed to these demons, but rather so that people could see more of the history of these prayers, because Leo had been critiqued about some things, and at one point somebody even wrote a book, and they were complaining, and Rome got involved and said, actually, this book that you're wondering about is fine, but we have some questions about what you wrote. It was kind of funny, but what it was in the response to this exorcist was actually very interesting, because Rome had said some of the very considerations that are in this exorcist's writings were what caused Leo to compose those prayers in the first place. So regardless of the question about demons and being liars, Rome made a statement about the history of those prayers, which was important for the purposes of my book, which is all about the history of the prayers. So that's why I have a whole chapter dedicated to that specific question. And it's important to know these things, because one of the I must give this man some honor. He passed away not too long ago, Father Anthony Cicada. He's a sedevacantist. I don't agree with that position, but he wrote a very good article about the history of the prayers, and in a not self in the sense of himself, but like in a broader, like traditionalist movement kind of thing. He was like, it's very common for traditionalists to get all titillated by and excited by conspiracy theories. He said, this one that I'm about to get into, he said, this is not one of them. The 1890 prayer was much longer, and then it was cut, and some of those more very direct statements were omitted, and the claim rose that, it was done after Leo's death, and after his, therefore, and he had nothing to do with it, and all those beautiful things that were really sticking it to the devil, they're all gone now. Oh, woe was us, woe was us. Well, and then Father Cicada was like, no, let's do some research here. And building myself upon his research, and I believe I duly cited him in these things, and I also consulted him before he went to his eternal reward. Very kind, very generous, and I even mentioned him in the acknowledgments of my book. there was basically what happened was the King of Italy and the Pope had engaged in backdoor conversations and negotiations. And so the theory is that Leo retracted or edited that prayer so as not to cause offense. So in other words, he did it for diplomatic reasons. But if that theory is true, it was related to the negotiations, then it does say something for the history of this prayer and why Leo wrote them in the first place.
Right.
If they were indeed about the situation with the King of Italy who had gotten to power in the first place because of all these anti-Catholic forces, well, if some of those forces are kind of going into abeyance just slightly, Leo was kind of like, all right, maybe we can do this. And I went all the way to the Vatican for this, to do this research. I contacted the secret archives. This was around 2014, I want to say. And they actually had the paperwork. And I got the original copy of the draft. And on the back, it had the handwritten signature from Cardinal Gotti that he had just walked out of the papal audience with Leo the 13th. So it was all done under Leo's direction and his say-so. He was in the loop. He was consulted. It wasn't some grand conspiracy theory.
So Pope Leo tempered some of the exorcism prayer to make it a bit less intense against the demons as a part of his negotiations with the secular forces of Italy.
Basically, that's the running hypothesis, and I have seen nothing to the contrary to run against it. So you're citing Anthony Giudicato, Sedevacantist of Sedevacantist fame, Russia and the Leonine prayers, and the St. Michael prayer, falsified text, both articles of his. And this is important to point that out because people start conspiracy theories about that prayer, but then they also start the same thing because when Paul VI suppresses the prayers, the St. Michael prayer after Mass, that no longer is said in the new Mass. So that becomes another conspiracy theory as well. So it's important that, is it a real conspiracy or not? Let's look at the evidence. Alleluia was asking, and I just checked this. An important question here. So basically, the Raccolta is an old book of indulgences which are no longer currently in force. So all those prayers are great. Obviously, you're going to get a partial indulgence in every case because you're just doing penance for your purgatory. But the Raccolta indulgences as promulgated are no longer in force. You have to actually get this, or not this book. You have to get this book, which is kind of you have to actually buy this in print to get the current indulgences. This is the Manual of Indulgences put out by the Apostolic Penitentiary, the Incurridion Indulgentiarum Normae and Concessiones. And there is no St. Michael prayer currently on the books for a plenary indulgence. You're always going to get, like I said, partial indulgences for pretty much anything you do because you're doing penances, but that's not on the books as a current indulgence. Any comments on the indulgent? I'm glad you brought that up because you just took the words right out of my mouth. It is important to note that there are current norms in effect on indulgences, and that book and any other updates on the Vatican's website are definitely very important to people. Have to know that these older books, they had information that pertained to that time, but the prayers are very beautiful and things of that.
Great prayer book.
But as far as, well, it says 100 days indulgence. Does that still hold? Get that book or go on the Vatican's website and double check. People need to know about that. So another big question that comes up is, are the laity allowed to say that longer prayer to St. Michael? The answer, strictly speaking, I tell people, please don't do that. I know there's a distinction between praying for oneself versus other people. And I'm going to get in trouble, I think, for saying this out loud. But one day I was watching one of these ghost hunting shows. Won't say which one, won't say who. And this person was going around using that exorcism prayer from Leo the 13th. And this person was a member of the laity. And I was screaming, no. Oh my goodness, that person was just, they were making the situation worse. Now, if you're sitting there and you want to pray it for yourself, maybe we can make an argument. The Vatican released a document under Ratzinger's term, the CDF, I believe, now DDF, Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith, updating people about what they can or can't do with these prayers. I encourage people to look on the Vatican's website for that information. But the long and short of it is, the one that the laity, that's approved for the laity without question, was the one that was issued, the second one that was issued in September of 1888, that was published later, I think in the 1898 edition of the Raccolta. It was published in Italian, I think it was Italian, certainly Latin. If not, if it wasn't Italian, it was in Latin. That's the one that was approved for use by the laity, but it was expanded upon for a formal exorcism of places for the clergy in the 1890 and then later the 1902 revised version. So I tell people, please just play it safe. If you want to pray one of those, just do the 1888 one. I think the 1888 one is in the book. If not, I have the text, and it was published in a book in 1898. So I have copies of that. I used to actually own the book, but I sold it last year to somebody. I think they're up in the Pacific Northwest now. So somebody has a copy of that book, and now they have a hit. And I was actually able to Zoom with them, and they were like, "Oh, this is," or Facebook video chat with them, and they were like, "I actually really wanted to know the history about this." So I sat and told them. So it's good stuff. So somebody's got a hold of a historic book, and that's very rare here in the United States.
Yeah, I was just looking everything up. I mean, so your book has the 1888 edition prayer to Saint Michael, which is in the Raccolta, and then there's the 1890 prayer, the Exorcismus prayer. That's the one you're saying not to use. That's for exorcist purpose. I wanted to mention because the other prayer, or the other question from Alleluia is, can you pray the auxilium prayers? So just the books here are, let me just show these on the screen here for those who are watching. So there's the Auxilium Christianorum prayers. This is the small one for those who join this lay fidelity. And then there are the deliverance prayers for the laity. This was approved by his bishops. This was issued with canonical authority from the bishop for use of the laity. So this is for the laity to use. And as far as the question here, I mean, as far as I know, that's fine, because the prayers of the auxilium are basically just like the litany to the precious blood, some general prayers to Mary against the demons. And it's always good to pray against the demons, as long as you're not wading into territory that you shouldn't be getting into, like trying to exercise things on your own authority. That's just bad news. Don't try to do that. But as far as I know, yes, you can do the auxilium prayers without being formally enrolled, but there's not really a formal enrollment. You just do the requirements and that's it. So it's pretty easy. That's pretty informal, but I would direct any more specific questions to the dolorens.org. You can send them a question. I don't know about you, Kevin, like if I ever have like a weird exorcist question, like for example, the monastery icons, which are allegedly cursed by some Hindu Gnostic thing, the monastery icons, I was like, okay, what the heck do I do with this? So I just sent them a question. What should I do with my monastery icons? And they just said, you need to burn them and bear the ashes. So that's what I did. I don't ask questions. I just ask the experts. I don't try to figure it out on my own. Don't mess around with demons.
In this case, who are the experts that you mentioned?
The Dolorens. That's the Dolorens, the order of exorcists that's run by Father Chad Ripperger.
And what is their mandate? Because I'm not familiar with them, so I'm curious.
They're under the bishop, I think, of Colorado. I don't know who the bishop, but
the Archbishop of Colorado has given them a mandate to do this.
I don't know all the specifics of that. All I know is they are working under the canonical authority of their own bishop. So don't quote me on anything.
I'm not too familiar with them. I'm not trying to give grief. I'm just saying, I'm just asking these questions. Trying to.
That's fine. I don't know the answers. Basically, I know that they are under their own bishop, but just looking at any.
I see somebody says Nicholas Mercier. I wish more would see this deep dive. Oh, Mr. Mercier, you have no idea how deep this rabbit hole can go. we are very limited on our time, unfortunately. I could go longer if if Tim wants to go on longer, I could totally do that. But there's so much that could be said. We have only a small window.
So, but basically, we have. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's John Colarafi. He was actually the French to English translator for Father Nicolas Gruner's Fatima Center in the 80s and 90s. This is the gentleman who translated Frère Michel de la Sainte-Trinité's 3-volume opus Toute la vérité sur Fatima. The whole truth about Fatima books that we know that's very popular among traditionalist Catholics today. So yeah, hi John.
Here, well,
and John has actually been very helpful in the past with that, with helping me to understand more of the history of how those books came to be with his translations and work with Father Gruner. So yeah, I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see him in the chat.
Well, and John says Ukrainian Catholic priests have been slaughtered, disappeared during this war with Russia, and Patriarch Sviatoslav, that's the Ukrainian Catholic Archbishop or Patriarch of the biggest Eastern Catholic Church, if you don't know, revealed that he was on the Russian hit list, notwithstanding Father Chiketa's claims that the persecution in Russia is over. I don't really know what Chiketa's claims are or not, but I do, on the subject of Russia, we do have a series going for guild members, which is the Russian Elements of Fatima. That's the book that I'm co-authoring with Maxim Grigorev. And Kevin, I've been talking with Kevin for years about Fatima. So we are delving deep into Russia and all that good stuff. But I don't know. I don't know how to comment on what you said, John, because I have no idea about any of that stuff. But Kevin, you have any comments about that?
Well, I don't want to go too deeply into that end of it because it's a little separate than what we're presently discussing. But I do know that with Sister Lucia commenting upon what the spreading of errors of Russia meant and how the consecration would have halted all of that, it wasn't done in time. So Russia was allowed to spread her errors throughout the world, causing all of those terrible things that Our Lady had predicted in 1917 in the secret of Fatima. So Russia is going to struggle with some things, as is the rest of the world. But I take great comfort in what Archbishop Sheen had said many years ago during one of his Life is Worth Living programs, when he said how he's like, Russia is like, regard communism as a kind of manure, he said. It'll be spread throughout the world, but it'll act like a fertilizer, he said, beginning in Russia, where there will be a Pentecostal fire, and that will spread throughout the rest of the world. And that's, then there will be a rejuvenation of faith. I take great comfort in his comments on that. Now, that's not to say that everything's going to be fine, hunky-dory-dairy, with the consecration of Russia with Fatima did not mean that God waves a magic wand over the world. And we're all holding hands, singing Kumbaya. That's not what that meant. The original object of the consecration, that ship sailed. The original object of the consecration was the halting of Russia's errors and the conversions, for as Sister Lucy said, change from something bad to good. So in this case, Russia would not have spread her errors, the bad, and the good would have been would have been the halting would have been the not spreading of the errors. Errors, the bad, halting, good, and that didn't happen. So the original object of the consecration sailed. It was gone. So what would the consecration now look like if it was done late? Well, Russia's errors are spread. We have to deal with that now. It is a fact. It's like, I always make this analogy. It's like the 1985, alternate 1985 with the Back to the Future movies. We went down an alternate historical route, not the one that God tried to warn us about, and to avoid. He wanted us to go down a different one, but we didn't. And you can't just like Men in Black it. Just everybody, please look here, and just wipe everybody's memories, and suddenly consecration wipes all these errors from everybody's minds, right, and nobody. Yeah. That's no. That's not. God doesn't memory wipe us like that.
Well, let me point, because John clarifies what he meant. So Father Chiketa claimed in the 90s that the Leonine prayers need no longer be said, alleging that the persecution in Russia had ended. This is interesting because I didn't know that there was any connection between the Leonine prayers and Russia, because as far as I know, these are totally separate private revelations that are dealing with different situations. Any comments, Kevin, on the relationship between the Leonine prayer of St. Michael and Russia and Fatima?
Yes. Well, when in the late 1920s, when the Vatican was negotiating with Mussolini with what we today know as the Lateran Treaty,
Yeah.
Of 1929, which gave ended the Roman question, who was sovereign of Rome, the Pope or the King of Italy. That was no longer a question anymore. Well, thus when that was coming on being resolved, the intention of the prayers after Mass was now not that wasn't there anymore. So the Congregation of Rites met to discuss what to do with the prayers, and they were going to axe them. Recommended that they be axed entirely, except an older cardinal stood up and said, "No, in fact, that those prayers were rooted in a vision that Leo had about Freemasonry, and they really shouldn't be axed." And we know that this happened because Father Joseph Jungmann wrote a book, Missarum Solemnia, and that was a very popular book about the history of the Roman liturgy. And it was translated into Spanish by a Jesuit, Father Teodoro Baumann. And Father Baumann had a translator's note in this section of the book where it talked about the prayers after Mass, in which he said, I heard from Father Francisco Bream, who was the editor, I think, or the publisher for Friedrich Pust at Liturgical Publishing House, the ones that published the Rituale Romanum, among other books. And Father Bream had attended the Congregation of Rites meeting where this happened, where they were going to axe those prayers. But long story short, now that somebody stood up and whatever they recommended, it went to the Pope. That time, Pius the 11th, and Pius the 11th had decided to change the intention, so to keep the prayers, but now they were to be prayed for the conversion of Russia, or for Russia. That's now the organic connection between those prayers, Fatima, even I would put that in there, and Russia. So from then, 1930-ish, roughly until the 1964, 1965, when the prayers were suppressed, that was the intention.
Now, let me ask this then, and this is an important other aspect of this that I want to bring up. So at Vatican II, this is another conspiracy theory, and I want to reference this article. This is from my co-author that I just mentioned, Maxime Grigorev. How bad was the Metz Agreement, a Russian Catholic perspective? And this is talking about this kind of a concordat, but not a concordat, with the Soviets to not condemn communism at Vatican II. But it's similar to what a concordat is, where the Holy See makes some sort of agreement with some government. They had a concordat with Hitler. They had concordats all over the place. It's just trying to make an agreement to have a pragmatic way of getting past what's going on and mostly have the freedom of the sacraments. That's the whole goal of a concordat, basically. The Metz Agreement was not a conspiracy to allow communism. That was not a conspiracy in a bad sense. It was an attempt to placate the Soviets so that there would be less persecution. We could have the freedom of the sacraments and all that good stuff. So it's important. So it sounds like, so my question is, what was Paul VI rationale then for taking away St. Michael's prayer? Was he then thinking, well, we're trying to follow this new policy with Soviets right now? We're trying.
No, that had nothing to do with it, as far as anybody knows. Well, first, let me say I haven't read that article that you just had up there on the screen. But just to be clear, the Metz Agreement, that's the one that was the backdoor agreement between John the 23rd in order to have the two Russian Orthodox observers at Vatican II. Is that the one?
Yes.
And Roberto de Mattei wrote about it in his book on the Vatican II about 13 or so years ago.
I believe so.
Okay, all right. Just so I'm clear on all that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we now know it is a thing, the Metz Agreement. Some people have questioned the historicity of it, but I think Roberto de Mattei kind of put it out there, and then there was somebody else that found more documentation, if I remember correctly. So it is a thing. I don't. You have to root it in what John the 23rd wanted for the council. It wasn't. It wasn't some sort of like an underhanded way to do things. We could question the prudence, of entering into such an agreement because as all anti-communist people warned, including the popes, they will co-opt you.
Yeah.
And before you even know what's going on. And that's why Pius XI, Pius XII, they forbade Catholics to have anything to do with Catholics do anything with communists. Because they're like, they will co-opt you. And even Bella Dodd herself said, God made no better infiltrators than communists. So we have to, it's a prudential judgment, if nothing else.
Right.
So John the 23rd.
What was his rationale then?
Rooting himself in the good Pope John idea of trying to, think better of people and things and wanting to do better. What it was it wasn't Paul VI's decision. It was actually, I'm going to say this and I'm going to catch him. I'll have a lot of trouble for this. It was actually a lot to do with Bonini running the concilium. The concilium was the group that was established to implement Vatican II's document, Sacrosanctum Concilium, there on the liturgy. And this document that came out in 1964, Inter Ecumenici, I believe it was paragraph 48J, says that the Leonine prayers are to be suppressed. And they cited, and this is the reason, they cited the passage in Sacrosanctum Concilium about simplifying the rites of Mass. They used that point of the document to justify the suppression of the Leonine prayers, because those were add-ons, as it were. They were later additions. Well, Paul VI signed off on it. That's true, but nobody asked the following question, or at least not publicly. The Leonine prayers were never in the Roman Missal. They were never a part of the Mass. From cover to cover, they were known as the orationes post missam, the prayers after Mass. So they were never in the liturgical books. Therefore, what justification do you have to say that you can use SC, I think it was paragraph 50 or 51, or from Vatican II, to simplify the rites of Mass when this has nothing to do with the rites of Mass? Objectively, it looks like a massive overreach. However, in the long run, it doesn't matter. Paul VI signed off on it. Thus, the prayers were suppressed. But for Bonini and the Concilium to do it under that aegis, as it were, of that part of the Vatican II's document, the liturgy, not the best justification. That you could only really argue, well, it's the spirit of the thing, that's the famous spirit of Vatican II coming out that so many people have issues with. We don't want to be legalists either, but at the same time, if you're going to cite, I think it was SC50 for your justification for suppressing the Leonine prayers, and they had nothing to do with the rites of the Mass anyway, well then, it does kind of make you wonder if what Father Louis Bouillet said about Bonini was correct, that he was a man bereft of culture.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a lot of stuff has come out now about Bonini, and there are those that absolutely maintain that he was a Freemason, and which would go to that earlier history. I think the jury is still out on all of that, but it would be an interesting, if it was proven that he was indeed a Freemason or somehow, locked up into it. I can say this though. You want an exclusive?
Of course, Kevin. Always.
You want people to watch this episode? I'll give you something. I'll give them something to make them watch it. I had occasion 3 years ago to look up the famous Bonini briefcase story. Was he a Freemason or not? Did he really get sacked and whatnot? Long story short, I did the research, and I do believe that I am 99% certain that I have the name of the person who found Bonini's briefcase. I'm 99% certain. This person lives here in the United States. Not too far from you, actually. You're closer to this person, I think, than I am. I won't say where, because I need that 1% before I can definitively sign off on this. But I did track the person down, and I'm reasonably certain that I have moral certitude that this is the person who found Bonini's papers that got him sacked. And I would like to reveal that someday, but there are things and processes in place that are prohibiting further research at this time. But if this person can be reached and they're willing to comment, all I know is they don't want to comment, at least at this time, because they were there in Rome during the Anni di Piombo, the years of lead, when if somebody knew something spoke up, bullet would shoot, come at you. And I'm told that they fear, that this person fears for their life.
Wow.
And how I even came across this in the first place was there was a gentleman. I used to live in Texas, and I have friends there. And one of them told me, Kevin, you should talk to this person because they did a lot of research and whatever else. And so I talked to this person, and I'll call this person Tim. No, not Tim, because you're Tim. No, not you. No, listen, no, I'll call this person Bill. I'll just call him Bill. As it turns out, Bill knows friends of the person who found the documents, and these friends know that this is the guy because the founder, the founder let slip who he was to these people. Well, these people talked to to my guy in Texas, and the friends of the founder wouldn't tell the name directly, but they knew enough about him where they talked to my friend, gave him a profile, and in turn, my friend gave me that profile. And as John Colarafi pointed, and he respected my abilities as a researcher, well, oh my goodness, you could ask the poor librarians up at the Hazen Public Library in Hazen, North Dakota. They got this box full of 10 years worth of those thick red Annuario Pontificios, the pontifical yearbooks from a library, and I had them all out on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, just ask Cindy. I think it was Cindy. Ask Cindy, you remember all those that box, all those red books and Kevin Symonds? She'll tell you, oh my goodness, you have no idea. I went through and I cross-referenced at the end of it. I looked at that guy from the movie Beautiful Mind, where he's got all the maps everywhere and all the strings attached. And I looked like I was losing my mind. But no, Cindy, I think, well, she'll back me up, I think. So long story short, I'm morally certain that I know who it was.
All right.
And this person is still alive.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Well, so how can everyone support your work? You can go to Kevin's website. You can subscribe to his blog. You can buy his books. Once again, you get a 10% discount for PCP books. And we'll have you on again for your Bella Dodd book once that comes out. I know somebody's asking about the Bella Dodd. We'll talk more about Bella Dodd in the future. So let's offer it all to Our Lady, as we should. And Kevin, can you pray the second half of this Hail Mary?
Okay.
Let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee, and those who have no recourse to thee, especially the enemies of Holy Church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is risen.